Hi everybody, let's finish up chapter 2. What we need to work on is section 4, and it talks about various indices that are used in statistics. So we're going to switch gears one last time. And to be quantitatively savvy, you really need to have a basic understanding of how these indices work because we see them reported quite often in the news. For example, the Consumer Price Index helps us look back in time and make sense of current prices. Consumer Confidence Index gives us a sense of how much money people want to spend in our economy, how much confidence they have essentially in our economy. So percentages do play a role in that, as you'll find out. So let's just jump right in. So an index helps us compare measurements that we make either from time to time or place to place. And the basic formula that we'll be using should look pretty familiar, because the index number that we'll calculate starts with some value. We're talking about typically the current value, and then we compare that to some reference value. So in this case, we'll be looking toward the past. And then we multiply by 100. You see we're computing a fraction. We then multiply by 100 so that we have a percentage. So it's just easier for people to understand. So for example, take a look at the prices that we have listed down here. These are average gasoline prices per gallon based on different years. And we can see that gas was pretty cheap back in 1955, and it got pretty expensive around 2005. This is listed in cents, so that's $2.31. And then what we're doing here is using 1975 as the reference year. And the reason why we're doing that is just so we can kind of have a one point in time that we can use as some comparison. So, we can say something like, well, in 1975 prices, gas today would be selling for, and then there'd be some value, just so we have a sense of how much it really has increased or decreased and how out of whack it might be with the past. So let's talk about how that's computed. Now there's one big tip off right here. You can see it says price as a percentage of the 1975 price. Well, of course, the 1975 price that's listed would be 100% of the 1975 price that's listed. So right there, we can already tell that in this table, 1975 serves as our reference point. Now, index numbers are often listed with just simply taking the percentage off. I don't know why we ever decided that that was a good idea. Indices are often mysterious to people because they don't know what those numbers mean. In reality, they're just serving as percentages of some baseline measurement, in this case 1975. So let's look at how we would actually compute those numbers. Again, we're just going to use our simple formula, the way it's set up here. So if we were looking at the 1975 year and we were trying to compute that price index, we would simply take the value that we're currently dealing with, which is the price per gallon, 56 cents, 56.7 cents in 1975, and then compare it to the reference value, which is also 1975's price, 56.7 cents. So of course, when we work that out, 56.7 divided by itself will equal 1. 1 times 100 will equal 100. So that explains the 100% right here and the value of 100 that we use for the index. So it's of course more interesting when we look at some other years. So let's look at this year, for example, 1955. So what we're trying to do is make sense of the gas price in 1955 based on 1975 as a reference point. So here we're going to take that value that we're currently concerned with, and that was the 1955 gas price, 29.1 cents, divided by 1975's price, 56.7 cents. And let's just work that out with the calculator real quickly. Oops, sorry. So here we have 29.1 cents divided by 56.7 cents. That equals 0.51, as we can see, and we would multiply by 100 to get 51.3. So it's essentially 51.3%. So again, it makes sense. We can see that the price here for gas back in 1955 was about half the price as it was in 1975. So you should never get confused about what value you have on top and what value you have on the bottom. First of all the numbers that we're using are using 1975's gas price as the reference value. And we know that the reference value goes on the bottom of our fraction right here. Furthermore, we can tell if we're on the right track just by seeing if we have a larger or a smaller number on the top of our fraction. We know that if we're trying to explain 1955 prices, which are cheaper, we should find a percentage that's less than 100%, because the gas prices in 1955 are just 51.3% of the gas prices in 1975. So it's about half what people were paying in 1975. So let's go through another example. Let's look at 2005. Now here we have an opposite type of effect. We can see that gas prices are much more expensive in 2005. So again, that's the value that we're actually interested in looking at. So that's going to be on the top. We're going to put our reference value from 1975 on the bottom. So we can already see we're going to have a larger number on the top, smaller value on the bottom. So the percentage that we compute will be over 100%. And again, that makes sense because people are paying more in 2005. So let's see what we find. We've got the 231 cents from 2005. We're comparing that to our baseline, 56.7 cents. We'll just verify this with our calculator real quickly. So we have 231 divided by 56.7, and that equals 4.07. We're going to multiply that by 100. We have 407.4. Okay, and that's what we have listed right here. So that makes sense for how we got these numbers. So we can see that when we look at this index, in 2005, people are essentially paying 4 times as much for gas when you compare that to 1975. 1975 is the baseline reference value that we're using. So that's how we use these price indices. Now, these price indices can be pretty helpful too in figuring out some values for some other years, like specifically like how much a tank of gas might cost. So check out this example. If it costs $8.50 to fill your gas tank in 1975, how much did it cost or would it cost to buy the same amount of gas in 2005? All right, so in this particular case, we're dealing with first $8.50 that comes from that reference year. All right, so this is going to be a pretty simple equation, and we want to figure out if we spent $8.50 in 1975, how much would it cost to buy that same amount of gas in 2005? Well, remember, we can see here, according to our index, it costs about 4 times as much in 2005 to buy the same amount of gas, because we're using 1975 as the reference point, and 1975 is when we paid $8.50. So all we're going to need to do is take that $8.50 and multiply it by this price index value. And specifically, we'll be using the percentage. We're going to multiply it by 407%, which is multiplying it by 4.07. So this is how it would look. So we have 407.4% multiplied by that $8.50, the amount that we're spending in 1975. Now, when we're dealing with mathematics in a calculator, we're typically going to punch this in like it's an actual value and not a percentage. And remember, to convert this back to an actual value, we just take that decimal place and we move it 1, 2 to the left. So what we really have here, this equation, is equal to this equation, 4.074 times 850. Let's pull out our calculator real quickly. So in this case, we would have 4.074 times 850. All right, and that makes sense, right? Because we can see in 2005, people are paying 407% what they'd be paying in 1975. 407% is 4.07 times what you were paying in 1975. So let's see what that equals. That equals $34 and about 63 cents. So we'll just fill in that answer. So we can see that if you wanted to fill up your gas tank in 2005, and we were trying to understand that in terms of $1975, we'd be paying $34.63. Okay. Let's go through another example. This gets just a little bit more complicated, and this is where we're going to try to compare some prices for years that don't directly involve the reference value. So for example, if it costs $34.63 to fill your gas tank in 2005, how much would the same amount of gas cost in 1955? Well, these numbers that we've computed here, they're all referenced to 1975, so we can use them pretty well together. Let's think about it logically first, because what I find is that students often get confused about what numbers they should put on the top and what numbers they should put on the bottom of the fraction that they're working with. And essentially, we just want to know, we're looking at 1955 and we're looking at 2005. And I just want to know, how do those numbers relate? And we can see here that related to 1975, in 2005, people are paying about 4 times as much for gas. In 1955, people are paying about half as much for gas. The question is, if it costs $34.63 to fill your tank in 2005, how much would the same amount of gas cost in 1955? It's obviously going to be cheaper, right? In 1955, gas prices were cheaper. So when I make a fraction of these index values, here they're listed as percentages, here they're listed as the actual index values. When I make a fraction of these index values, I'm going to want to have the 1955 on top and the 2005 on the bottom. That's going to help me find out how they specifically are related for those 2 years. And obviously the number that I get is going to be less than 1, because I'm going to have a 51 on the top and a 407 on the bottom. I can then multiply that ratio, because that ratio talks about how those 2 years are related in terms of their gas prices. I can then multiply that ratio times 34.63 to find out how much that same amount of gas would cost in 1955. So that seemed like a lot of explanation, but in reality, the math we do is very simple. So here we take the 51.3 from our index for 1955. We put that over the index value for 2005, 407.4. And I'm simply now going to convert that into a fraction. And let me just verify that using the calculator. If we take 51.3 and divide by 407.4, that equals 0.1259, or about 0.13, or, if we wanted to discuss it as a percentage, about 13%. So don't ever get confused about differences between like a 0.13 and a 13%. They represent the same value. We're just expressing that value slightly differently. So now what do we need to do? What we're learning is that in 1955, the price would have been 13% or 0.13 of the amount you spent in 2005. So we're simply going to multiply 0.13 times $34.63. So we'll pull out our calculator, take 0.13 and multiply that by 34.63. And that will equal $4 and about 50 cents. So about $4.50. So if it costs $34.63 to fill your tank in 2005, you could have purchased the same amount of gas in 1955 for $4.50. And we can use these numbers to compute any ratio to compare any set of years. So you'll probably want to go through a couple examples of that just to make sure you're familiar, just for homework. All right, just some quick news real quickly again about index numbers before we finish up. There really are many different indices that are reported in the news. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned the Consumer Price Index. It's essentially used to track goods and services, housing costs. It's kind of an inflationary measure because like the price of everything goes up over time. That's an inflation issue. And new indices really are created pretty often. A lot of them don't have staying power. You might hear about them in the news and not hear about them again. But other ones really hold our attention for a long time, and we have some long-term data. But in all cases, they make it easy for us to compute comparisons across time. Well, this was a pretty short section, and that was the key content from section 2.4. So for now, that is all.